Today we're going to finish the story of Gideon. Just to recap a little bit, remember last time we started the story of Gideon in Judges 6, and we find Israel oppressed by the Midianites because of their unfaithfulness. Gideon is called to lead an army to free the people of Israel from the hand of Midian. And his response to that call is very, very halting and unsure. He offers several excuses why he's not the best person. And then at the end of chapter 6, we have the incident of the fleece, where basically Gideon asks for sort of like proof that God's actually calling him to undertake this, and it's going to be successful. So Gideon is not, I underline the word not, Gideon is not being presented as sort of like a hero or a great man. He is very hesitant and very unsure. And then, remember, we also finished last week by saying that just before God sends the army into battle against the Midianites, remember, he narrows the army down to 300 men. So Gideon is coming up against an army of about 125,000 with an army of 300. And the purpose of this is to underline the fact that Israel is only going to be victorious because of the hand of God. And sure enough, that's what happens toward the end of chapter 7 as they go into battle. This is what we're told in Judges 7:20. They yell before going into battle, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Every man stood in his place around the camp, and all the army ran off, and they cried out and fled. And when they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army, and the army fled as far as Beth-Shittim toward Zerah. So sort of two elements are taking place here. On one hand, it's the element of surprise, and the other, it's the element of God's intervention that finally wins the day. So we're going to pick the story up now in Judges 8 and see how it concludes. And then as we get to the end, I want to just offer a brief reflection on what the story of Gideon has to say about power and our relationship with it, because I think that's one of the fundamental themes of the story. Now in Judges 8, we learn some more negative things about Gideon. We've learned that he's slow to respond. We've learned that he kind of really wants definite proof from God because he basically doesn't trust God. We'll also learn now that he has a kind of a vindictive streak to him that comes out in a couple places. So I'm going to read to you the first part of Judges 8. So this is after the initial battle. Some of the Midianite kings have fled with their army. Their army has now been reduced from about 125,000 to 15,000, having fought an Israelite army of 300. And so now Gideon is now chasing the army, and here's what happens. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this that you have done to us, not to call us when you went to fight against Midian?" And they accused him fiercely. And he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is it not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grapes of Abiezer? God has given it into your hands, the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. What have I been able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger against him subsided. So first thing that happens is, and this is a hint of things to come, Gideon now goes through the territory of Ephraim, and they're angry because he hasn't called them to participate in this glorious battle. And of course, right, the thing that's clearly operative here, right, is it appears now that Israel's winning, and so the Ephraimites are mad that they're not in on the glory, okay? That is, they're not being particularly brave here, right? You know, it's sort of like, you may have had this happen, right, where you volunteered to help somebody do something, and you show up at their house just at the point where they're finishing it up, and you say, "I'm here to help." And they say, "Well, gosh, all the work's done." And you say to yourself, "Darn." I missed out. That's kind of what's going on here. So that's Ephraim, and then this. And Gideon came to the Jordan and crossed over. He had 300 men who were with him, exhausted yet pursuing. So he said to the men of Sukkot, so now he's in Israelite territory, he's near the city of Sukkot, and now this is the exchange he's going to have with them. Please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they exhausted, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. And the officials of Sukkot said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your army? So Gideon said, well then, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will flail your flesh with thorns of the wilderness and with briars. So here's what happens, remember? So he gets to Sukkot. He's pursuing the Midianite army. His troops are hungry. They haven't had anything to eat. He asks them for bread, and their response is, well, I mean, you haven't won yet. The battle isn't over. You need to finish what you started. Why should we be helping you? Notice another little hint here, right? We're getting a sense of the deep, deep fractures that exist among the tribes. These are not, while we refer to them all as the people of God or Israelite, they are very, very divided over one another. And remember, right, Gideon is remember what Gideon's doing, right? Gideon, remember, is fighting to drive the Midianites out, and these folks are unwilling to help. So there's obviously some pretty deep divisions here. And then things continue on. And then from there, he went up to Penuel and spoke to them the same way. And the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Sukkot answered him. And he said to the men of Penuel, when I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. That apparently they're the famous tower there in their city. So once again, same response. He's fighting against a common enemy. Another tribe is still unwilling to help in the effort. And what happens after that, I think, is really, really interesting. Finally, Gideon wins the battle. Zebah and Zalmunna are caught and killed. The rest of the Midianite army is either killed or driven off, and so Gideon carries the day. What's really interesting is how the story of the battle ends. I'm going to read it to you because I think what happens here, this is in Judges 8. This is Judges 8:21, the last part. So he has these two kings killed, or he kills them himself, and this is what happens. And Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. Now, that may not seem very significant, but it actually is, and we'll see why in just a minute. Gideon kills these last two kings, and he removes the ornaments that were on their camels. And these aren't just camel jewelry, okay? No. These are special gold sort of necklaces, collars, whatever, that would have fit around the camel's neck and shoulders to identify this as a royal camel and the carrier of the king. This will be sort of like, if you've ever seen the president's official limousine. Remember, it's got the seal on the side of the door and the two flags on the front and that sort of thing. This is the same thing. So notice what happens. Gideon basically takes these sort of royal emblems for himself. Now, this is going to be really important in terms of what happens later on. And then this. So the battle's basically over. And then this happens in Judges 8:22. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian. Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. the Lord will rule over you." And Gideon said to them, "Let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil." For they had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. And they answered, "We will willingly give them." And he spread out a cloak, and every man threw in it the earrings of his spoil. And the weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, which is a lot of gold, besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and besides the collars that were on the necks of the camels. And Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city of Ophrah. And all Israel whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. So here's how the battle comes to an end. The battle comes to an end, and the people of Israel ask Gideon to be their king. Now, notice here, and this is really important, right? There's been no talk of king from God up to this point. And there won't be any talk of that until we get to 1 Samuel. So here's the point. The point is that this is totally a desire on the part of the people of Israel. And also there's a really sort of like dark wedge to this. Gideon has just killed the Midianite kings. And basically what the people of Israel are sort of thinking, right, is, you know, all the people that are around us are like wealthy and powerful and have these great armies, and they're all ruled over by kings. Do you suppose that if we had a king, then we would become wealthy and powerful and have a great army too? That's the ticket. We need a king. And so they asked this of Gideon. Now, the thing that we just want to notice here, and this will be something that you'll want to keep in your mind till we actually do get to 1 Samuel, is notice this. One of the things that Judges is helping us to see is it's helping us to see that the people of Israel basically are in effect essentially becoming Canaanites, right? They want Canaanite government, Canaanite army, Canaanite social order. That's what they want. They don't want to live under God's covenant. They want to live in a very different way. And that's the source of their rebelliousness, okay? And it comes out in a very sort of graphic way. And this is where I say this story is in some ways about power. That is, they're in effect saying, you know what? This whole business of covenant and God leading us out of slavery just isn't going to do it. We need to be like the people around us if we're going to resist them. That's the only way we're going to survive. So if they got kings, we need a king. Their understanding of power is exactly the same as all the people around them. And this is like a huge failure in some ways. So that's one thing. And then the other thing to notice here is this. And this is really interesting, right? The people of Israel say to Gideon, okay, we want you to be a king. And Gideon says, no. I would never, ever think of such a thing. The Lord is going to be your king. Oh, and by the way, could you just do one thing for me, please? I'm going to spread out this big cloak on the ground. And what I want you to do is all the kind of gold earrings and stuff like that you got from conquering the Midianites, I want you to kind of just put that in that cloak, and that'll be sort of like a love offering for me. And then lo and behold, right, all that gold, 1,700 shekels, which is a lot. I mean, this would have like been like a royal treasury, basically, right? 1,700 shekel. Gideon has that fashioned, or part of it fashioned, into a sort of a gold ephod, this kind of long gold sort of coat that would like fit over his whole body. And he has it put in his city of Ophrah, and this is important too, the people of Israel come and worship it. So notice what we've got here. Gideon says, oh, no, I wouldn't think of becoming a king. I am far too humble and lowly for that. And besides, we all know that God's your real king. And then he has this sort of kingly garment created, set up, and people come and worship it. So it's this really sort of ambiguous thing, right? No king, but yet he's basically dressed like one. Okay? It would be like, well, there was a funny cartoon in a church journal that I saw a while back. And it shows a pastor standing behind his desk, and he's got like this royal robe, a crown on his head, and he's holding a scepter. And there's like the senior warden standing in front of the desk. And the caption has the pastor or the rector saying, "What's this about me being out of touch with the congregation?" If you're dressing yourself like a king, you're probably thinking of yourself as a king. And that's what's going on with Gideon. Now, what happens, of course, as I noted, right, is that Gideon actually does go back to Sukkot and to Penuel and punishes all the people who refused to help him. So there's something of a sort of a vindictive streak. That is, Gideon uses his power not to unify Israel or to kind of like bring them into sort of like covenant obedience. Basically, he uses his power to kind of like get revenge on the people he doesn't really like. So it's an interesting sort of thing. Now, here's how the story ends, and then I'll say a few things about power. And remember, Gideon is also given the name Jerubbaal, who resists Baal. That's Gideon's alternative name. Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. Now Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, for he had many wives, and his concubines who was in Shechem also bore him a son, and he called his name Abimelech. And we're going to see that Abimelech's going to be the star of the next story. And Gideon, the son of Joash, died in a good old age, and he was buried in the tomb of Joash's father at Ophrah of the Abiezrites. As soon as Gideon died, notice this, as soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. And the people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hand of their enemies on every side, and did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. So here's how the story ends, and it's kind of setting us up. If Judges were like a Netflix series, this would be like the perfect transition, right? You know the story isn't over because Gideon has a son who's going to be involved in, the Judges version of succession. So here's what happens. Two kind of really depressing comments about how the story turns out. First of all, the moment that Gideon is dead, that's the moment the people of Israel choose to turn back to the sort of chief god of Canaan, Baal. That is, with Gideon's death, Baal-berith, which in Hebrew literally means Baal the blessed, Baal-berith, Baal the blessed, he becomes Israel's sort of official god again. Okay? Obviously that's not good either, because we have, once again, the breaking of the covenant. And then, and this is the other negative comment, the people of Israel didn't remember the Lord their God, and they also forgot all about Gideon and all that he had done. That is, notice what's going on here. After having kind of lived through this miraculous deliverance, the people of Israel decide to move on. Okay, all that's over. We're going to go back to the way that things were. We're going to start worshiping Baal again. And they completely forget about what happened. They even forget about what Gideon's done. And I think the really key phrase here is this. It may not sound important, but it actually is quite important. Um, they forgot about the Lord who had delivered them from the hands of their enemies, and they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal. Now, this word, steadfast love, is really important. In Hebrew, it's actually only one word, and we actually don't have a real good English equivalent, so translators kind of have to kind of contort themselves to find something. And it really means something like, and you might want to think about this as a string of words with dashes in between, steadfast loving kindness and faithfulness. That's what the one word means, essentially. The thing here is that this one word describes God's disposition to Israel. Steadfast loving kindness and faithfulness. Okay? Unfortunately, as this story has made it clear, right, this does not describe Israel's relationship to God, who wants, indeed, the moment that the crisis is over, basically everything that God has done becomes simply a blank in their minds. And they go back to the way of things that they had been doing as far as they could remember. Now, I think in some ways, as said, the story of Gideon is a story about power, and it's a reflection on power. So let me just say a few things about it, because I think it's actually an important story. We want to take seriously the fact, right, that Gideon is not being presented as sort of like a hero. Okay, that is, we would not want children, like, reading the story of Gideon and to have like little boys saying, "Yes, I want to be like Gideon." No, you don't. And please don't use him as an example. That is, I think one of the things we're seeing here is a really important kind of theological message. There's a reason why it is that God's people actually cannot have a human being as their king. And that's simply because no human being is capable of carrying that out. And we're seeing this in Gideon. We'll see it in other people too. Of course, in some ways, right, we'll even see it in David and Solomon and the whole line, right? We'll discover that the reason why God's people can't have a human king, because finally no human being is actually able to carry out this role. Let's think about why that is. I think that's an important subject. One reason, of course, is this. One reason why no human being could actually be sort of an adequate king or ruler over God's people is because of their own sinfulness, right? And one of the things that comes with sinfulness, right, is it kind of like distorts our relationship with power. And we see this in Gideon, right? On one hand, right, there are notes in Gideon that on his good days, he does have some awareness that he's been called to serve God. You kind of get that now and then. Unfortunately, right, things finally don't turn out that way because he finally basically ends up making sort of Canaanite royal regalia for himself. And so, we have this, if this were being made in a movie, what I envision, is the story ends with Gideon standing in front of like a full-length mirror with a robe and a crown and a scepter and saying to himself, "Thank goodness Israel doesn't have one of those awful Canaanite kings." Right? That is, one reason why it's difficult for human beings to deal adequately with power is that with our kind of fallen and twisted hearts, right, we lack the resources to deal with power in the way that it needs to be dealt with. A second reason is this, and we've seen this in Gideon too. A second reason, right, is that we also lack the wisdom to use power always in the right ways, right? That's certainly another theme that's present here. That is, the contrast, obviously, right here is with God's own use of power. With God, right, God's power is always at the service of his own perfect goodness and his own perfect wisdom. That is, God's power is always exercised for the good of his creation, and it always is guided by his own perfect wisdom. It's never arbitrary. Okay, so that's one of the differences that exists here. Now, there's a couple, just maybe two biblical texts we might want to look at. The first is, and this is kind of looking ahead, the first is 1 Samuel 8, 1 through 18. This is one of the passages that I mentioned just a few moments ago, where Israel actually is wanting a king, and they're wanting Samuel to be that king. 1 Samuel 8, 1 through 18. So what's happening is that the people of Israel have come to Samuel, and they want him to be a king. And here's how it goes. I'll shorten this just for the sake of brevity. This actually sounds like the way they approached Gideon. When Samuel had become old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah, and they were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain, which is a polite way of saying they took bribes. So whenever someone comes into their court, they're listening to the case, and basically, they say, you're offering a really convincing argument, and I'm just about on the point of agreeing with you. Just give me a little help. Right? So that's what's going on. So they turned aside after gain, they took bribes, and they perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered around and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, and this doesn't sound very complimentary, you are old, and your sons do not walk. You're a geezer, and both your sons stink. So appoint a king for us to judge us. And now listen to this. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. We want to be like them. Okay? This is sort of like, the teenage child that comes home asking for like the latest thing. And when you, as the wise, financially prudent parents say, well, why would you need this? The answer is everybody's got one, or everybody's doing it, or something like that, right? So what happens is that Samuel prays to God, and then Samuel is told to give the people this warning. This is 1 Samuel 8, 10 and following. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and to run after his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and he will some to plow his ground, and others to reap his harvest, and to make implements of war and equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take a tenth of your grain and your vineyards and give it to his officers and servants. He will take your male and female servants, the best of your young men and your donkeys, and put them to his work. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And on that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. It's a pretty bad picture, right? Okay, well, if you want a king, we'll get you one. But you just want you to know, right? If you got a king, right, he's got to live like a king, right? That means he needs servants and officials, and it all has to be financed, right? So taxation, and he's going to take your land away, and take your donkeys away, and draft your sons into his army, and all your daughters are going to end up, baking cakes for him, and on and on and on and on. That is, this does not seem to be a good thing. Now, contrast. Revelation 5, and this is where we'll stop. Revelation 5 is, I think, a really central biblical meditation on power. We're still talking about a king, but we're talking about a king of a very different sort. So remember, in Revelation 4, John has this vision of God's throne, and now we have more about that vision in Revelation 5. Then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a scroll written within on back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw the mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll and look into it. And I began to weep loudly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. That is, the scroll here is sort of God's plan of redemption, right? Who can open this thing? Well, no creature. And so John starts to cry because he wants the plan of redemption to be put into effect. And one of the elders said to me, "Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." And between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders, I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slain, with 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who was seated on the throne. And when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song, saying, "Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people from God, from every tribe and language and people and nation. And you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on earth." Here's a very different vision of a very different kind of king, right? In this vision, we don't see someone who's trying to look like a Canaanite monarch. Rather, what we see is a lamb with the mark of slaughter. This king has used his authority not to build a palace, not to get rich, not to put people under subjection to him, not to enrich himself. This king has used his power, literally has given his life to redeem humankind. This is the only king that finally human beings can really have. And Revelation is now contrasting this with Gideon, but also David and Solomon as well. Well, we'll see what happens when we have a small version of succession and Gideon's son becomes Israel's next judge.